So just to talk about that just a little further, while there is always a demand for metals like aluminum and copper, the demand for recycled newspaper is kind of fluctuating. And so when newspaper's in low demand, there's a single stream sorting facility that might pull out the newspaper and sell it and give it to like local horse breeders or something. At other times, when demand paper is high, the newspaper might be kept with other papers and then recycled into new paper products. Anyway, because recycling requires time, processing, cleaning, transportation, and possible infrastructure needs to be set up for to reuse these raw materials. New York City has made this really controversial decision happen in 2002 to suspend glass and plastic recycling, period. This was a major shift in policy for the city. It basically encouraged as much recycling as possible. So it included the collection of like mixed recyclable things, glass, plastics, newspapers, magazines. And so after the collection, the recyclables were then sent to a facility where it could have been sorting. So according to the city officials, the entire process of sorting these glass and plastics from other recyclables and selling the material was not cost effective at all. And so in 2004, the recycling of all of these materials was put to an end in New York City. So today, the goal of most recycling programs is to basically maximize the diversion of stuff that's going to the landfill, even if that means collecting the materials and having that have very little economic value. And also communities, they periodically have a different type of funding type of system. And so all of this causes the recycling industry to fluctuate. Okay, so composting. So an alternative way to treat organic waste through than just sending it to the landfill would be to compost, and it's becoming quite a bit more popular these days. It basically creates organic matter like a humus type of soil that can be decomposed under controlled conditions and usually produces a rich organic material that enhances soil structure. It has an increased cation exchange capacity and also increases the fertility of the actual soil. So vegetables and vegetable byproducts like corn stalks, grass, animal manure, yard waste, leaves, branches, and like paper, fibers. They're not really designed to be recycled. So composting is a good option for them. So normally meat and dairy products are not composted because they do not decompose very easily and they really produce this really bad smell, and they're more likely to attract unwanted things like rats and skunks and raccoons and ants and all kinds of stuff. All right, so but outdoor compost systems, they can be very simple, like much like a pile of yard waste in the back corner of your yard. You can even they make special boxes. You can make special boxes. And you want to mix it and aerate it from time to time. We've talked about this before, I think, is when it comes to the decomposing of material. We're familiar with the process that takes place, right? And it basically has a ratio of carbon to nitrogen that is reduced, and as it's reducing, it best supports a microbial activity. And that ratio is usually 30 carbon into 1 nitrogen. But anyway, it's possible to kind of calculate this whole carbon nitrogen content of the material that you put into your compost pile to basically produce the most valuable outcome. All right, so that's a real thing. But large scale composting facilities currently operate in like many municipalities and cities in the United States. Some of these facilities are actually indoors, and a lot of them employ like workers that just go through the basic process of composting. Oh, look, there's a picture. I almost forgot this was on the next slide. All right, so organic material is piled up in long, narrow rows of compost, and the material is turned frequently, exposing it to a combination of air and water. And this kind of speeds up the natural aerobic decomposition process. As with household composting, the organic material must include the correct combination of green, fresh, and brown dried organic stuff. And this ratio of carbon and nitrogen is optimal for basically bacterial to grow. So various techniques are used to turn the organic material periodically. And these include things like rotator blades that move along these piles of organic matter, and or like a front loader that turns the piles. The respiration activity of the microbes generates enough heat to kill any type of pathogenic bacteria that may be contained within those food scraps. And that's typically a concern for a large company, right, who compost. And the pile becomes too hot, it needs to be turned quite a bit more frequently. And if the pile doesn't become hot enough, operators can check it to make sure that the carbon-nitrogen ratio is optimal. And it's a good slow down in a turnover rate if it doesn't become warm. So within a matter of weeks, organic material and waste can basically compose or decompose, become compost. And so large-scale cities and their composting systems have relatively little mechanisms and labor that go into making all of this fresh compost. So it's not necessary to have like a large outdoor space to compost household waste, or composting is even possible inside of a little apartment or dorm room. It's even possible to set up a composting system in your kitchen. There's a very popular book, it's called Worms Eat My Garbage, and how to set up and maintain a worm composting system. And that encourages thousands of little kids across the country to compost their actual kitchen waste using these little wiggler, the red wiggler worms. You probably know what that is if you fish. But a small household recycling bin is enough to serve as like a worm box and create compost. So this whole composting process does take some time, it does take some space, and the source of separating a lot of this stuff can be an inconvenience, and in some situations probably not even possible. And also there's certain environments where you want to have it or not have it because you don't want it to attract like flies or vermin. But composting itself can attract also like unwanted animals like rats and skunks and raccoons and bears, I'm sure. Oh my. So because compost, high organic matter, it has this high, like I said before, cation exchange capacity. It contains a lot of nutrients, and that enhances the soil quality. And it's just good for our agriculture fields, our gardens, our lawns, whatever. So in our 3R lesson, you've seen reduce, reuse, and recycle, and we've talked a lot about composting, way too much that you probably didn't want to know. These are all things that are appropriate actions to take before you send a bunch of your solid waste material to the waste stream. And it's important to observe the 3Rs in order because that's where they start. Composting is another pathway for diverting material from the waste stream, and this diversion of compost material from landfills reduces methane production and also produces a desirable end product, right? Decomposed organic matter, also known as really great fertilizer. All right, so now let's talk about what happens when the material is not diverted into the solid waste stream.